Hello, and welcome to the Blue Collar Wealth Club podcast. I am your host, Jerry Garcia.
And I am your other host, Sheena White.
Awesome. Today, we want to talk a little bit about KPIs and metrics and tracking things and why we track them and how we track them and, what does it do for us?
Everyone's favorite topic.
Right?
Tracking things. I feel like some of my clients, if I use the term KPI one more time, they're just gonna exit. Just gonna be like, bye. But they're really important.
Yeah, there's a lot of reasons why we track our metrics. First of all, getting someone to track what they're doing, I think a lot of the initial hesitation is that they think that they're being micromanaged, right? That's the initial 100%. Resistance you may get from your employees or from your crew or whomever when you initially present this idea. And that's probably the first hurdle you have to get over is helping them to understand that, we're not here to micromanage. We're not here this is not like a performance review. This is more of an efficiency tool for us to understand what we're doing and how we can improve it so that we can, grow better, work more efficiently.
Well, yeah, and if you're not tracking, every step in your process, how do you know which step is broken, right?
Right.
So if something isn't working, you can change everything, but maybe you only needed to change one thing. It's just the same as like a math problem. If you have multiple variables in a math problem, you first have to identify one or two of those variables to be able to identify the last one, because you can't have more than one and figure it out. Like the math doesn't work. And it's the same with KPIs along a process. If you don't have them along that process, you'll never know which part of the process isn't working.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. Let's kind of dive right into that, right? Let's say you're having an issue with let's go to the sales process,
Okay.
and you've noticed for the last 3 months you've been tracking your sales, but let's say that's all you're tracking. You're only tracking sales, and you've noticed for the last 3 months that the sales numbers have gone down.
Yeah.
Now you can go through and you can change your marketing, and you can go through and you can, change the scripts on your leads. You can change 3 or 4 things, and then the next month, maybe it's flat and you don't see anything. And then you go back and change everything again, and then the next month it's up. And so you think that solved it, but really, you don't really know which part of what, you solved. And so it's important, like you said, to only work on one thing at a time.
Yes.
To really only work on one thing at a time. And that seems like, I want to find out the problem faster, but sometimes you have to slow down to speed up, because let's say that, you changed all 4 things in your process and that next month was flat. Who knows if you actually solved the problem with one thing, but by changing something else,
you created a whole new problem.
You counteracted it, and so that's why it's flat, right? Like you changed the script, which actually was better. It was better converting, and so your conversions went up, but you're not tracking that. But you also changed the marketing, and that marketing didn't work as well, so the leads are down. But if you're not tracking the leads separately and the conversions separately, it looks like flat month over month, and so you think, oh, that didn't work, none of that worked, so let's just try 4 new things.
Exactly. Yeah, and I see this a lot too. People will be like, I need more leads. There's like an obsession with leads. But to me, more leads just means more work, right? Because every lead, then you have to qualify that lead, and then if they're qualified, then you have to get some sort of consultation or appointment with that lead. Then you have to run said appointment and consultation, and then you have to close them. So every lead is work. But what if instead of more leads, we focused on our conversion ratio? Like I had a client once who he was like, I don't have enough leads. And we went through an exercise and looked at every step in his sales process and realized he had more than enough leads. He couldn't convert to save his life. It was like 10%. So that meant of every 10 estimates he was doing, which an estimate takes a long time, he was getting 1 client. I was like, dude, if you just double your conversion ratio, if you just go to 2 clients, which still is pretty terrible, honestly, that's really not great.
Right.
I know people who are converting at like 50, 60, 70%. Now, it obviously depends on your industry, but 20% or 10% is abysmal. 20% is bad. In the home services industry, you probably want to be right around like between 30 and 40%. Means your pricing is good, but your sales process is good too. But my point is, like, if he just doubled his conversions with the exact same amount of leads, he literally would double his revenue.
Right.
That's all he had to do. He didn't need to go do more work. He just needed to, make that work actually work.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, exploring that same scenario, right? So let's say you just listen to him, if you're just the type of, consultant who just listens to what the client says and assume that they know the problem, which if they knew the problem, they would fix it themselves, right?
Maybe.
So let's say you do that. Yeah, okay, let's go. Okay, let's figure out, all right, you're spending this much per month on Google, click ads, and
Let's double it.
yeah, let's just double the spend. That should get us double the leads. And then,
happen.
and yeah, exactly. But let's pretend that it did. So now he has twice the leads. So now, yes, he has way more leads to work with, but he's still having to go on twice the amount of estimates to double the amount of revenue.
Yeah, twice the amount of estimates. He's spending twice as much.
Yeah.
Right, because every single one of those leads costs money. So he's across the board spending. He's running around like a chicken with his head cut off because he was already doing a lot. I mean, his business was not small. So it was like a $2.5 million business and an average $25K a pop. So he was running himself ragged as it was. And he was like, more leads. I'm like, dude, you can't handle more leads. Like, part of the reason your close ratio is so terrible is because you're doing too many estimates and you're not making anyone feel special. Like, you need to actually have less leads and more conversions. But he would have never known that had we not done this exercise and started looking at those metrics in the individual phases of that macro sales process.
Well, yeah. Yeah, let's say, like you said, you spend twice the money. Okay, now I can't do all these estimates. Okay, well, let's hire another guy to do estimates, right? So now he's doubled his leads, spending twice as much money. He's, and now he's had to hire someone, so now his overhead has gone up. So yes, he's doubled the amount of revenue, but he probably brought on another guy who's costing him all that revenue plus some. So yes, he's accomplished his goal, more leads, but now he's making less money.
That sounds awesome. That sounds
and this
like
is
the best idea ever.
This is the kind of process, right, that you're trying to help people avoid, and that's why it's important to have the people who understand. And this is why we're very adamant about tracking things and and explaining, like, look, we're not tracking you as a sales team to fire you or to punish you. It's quite the opposite. Like, if we would have looked at this process at the beginning, say you do all that and you revisit it 6 months later, things aren't looking any better, and you say, all right, well, that didn't work. Let's kind of dig deeper, and you start tracking. Then you hop on the conversions. You're like, oh, this was the issue all along. We just wasted 6 months fixing
and
the wrong thing.
A whole bunch of money.
Yep.
Right, and then once you get the conversion up, then you can scale from there, right? So then you've doubled your revenue, but you've spent the same amount of time and money.
Right.
Right, because he did all those estimates. He just didn't get many of them to say yes. So the more yeses he could achieve, then it's just straight revenue in his pocket. Then if he has a converting process, then he can go hire that salesperson and say, okay, this is the converting process. This gets us, 20% conversion, which still is low. So let's say we got to 35% conversion, then he has 3.5 times as much sales from the exact same leads, the exact same work. That sounds way better to me personally.
Yeah, and when you're trying to build a scalable business, right, your goal as the owner should be to be the owner. I mean, and some people really enjoy, and that's part of the process that they really like, and that's fine if you want to be that involved. But as the owner, you have to be the one also who has the vision for the company, who's the overseer of everything. So if you spend all your time there, you can't really do the rest. So, like you said, you kind of change the script or change the sales process just a little bit, get that converting to, now we're at 20%, and then you get it up to 35%. Say, okay, great. Now we can bring on somebody to do these estimates, and you can teach them the sales script, and everything's still converting at the same rate, and you can then overlook the business again and find out where else you're having some of these issues. And maybe now you have the sales process. Now let's go to the customer satisfaction, and how do we improve that? Let's look at our reviews. Let's look at how long it's taking us to do a job. Let's look at how quickly people are able to get things on the books, and individually revisit those things to improve your reviews.
Yeah, how many go backs do you have? Any callbacks they are profitability and client satisfaction killers. It is so much better to just do it right the first time, even if it takes you a little bit longer, right? So again, to our topic of, kind of slowing down to speed up, which is, has a little bit to do with metrics, but whatever. We're there. Sometimes you need to do it right to give that good client satisfaction. A client would rather you spend an hour extra at their location on a day than have to come back 2 weeks later because something was wrong.
Right. Or even take an entire day, right? Just say like you're doing something and you'd booked yourself out. Say, this will take us maybe a week and you're 5 days in and you think you're done. And so you pack up and leave. And then they, 2 weeks later, they're like, hey, this doesn't look right or this isn't functioning right. And you have to go back out there and fix it. It's bad for your crew. It's bad for your business. And that customer is going to they're not going to refer you. They're going to say, well, they did a good job, but it's never going to be that like really satisfied feeling where if you would have just taken, okay, we gave ourselves a week and you took one last day to walk that, to test everything, to make sure everything looked and functioned appropriately, and really make that like a knockout, where you can go to the client and say, look, I want you to go through this. Let's go through it together. Let's look at it together. Let's test everything together and make sure that everything is exactly the way you wanted it. And if you revisit it right then and they catch something, you say, oh, you know what? You're right. You could fix it within the same time frame you gave them. And that's such a better experience for the client. And they're going to feel really well taken care of. And they're going to tell people about that experience with your company.
Yeah.
Versus just not mentioning it because they didn't feel like it was worthy of a referral.
Well, it's like, imagine if you go to a steakhouse, right? You go to a nice steakhouse and you order a really nice steak, medium rare. Would you rather wait 5 extra minutes to have the correct steak set down on your plate, or have them rush and then give you either an underdone or overdone steak, so then you have to send it back and all this things? Like, if you're in the moment and you don't even notice, right? Unless it's like an ungodly amount of time, but within reason, you wouldn't notice if they accidentally overcooked your steak and had to throw a new one on there. And they did that all in the back, and then they brought out the correct one, and then you have this great experience and you're telling everyone, oh, the steak was amazing, exactly the way I wanted it, versus they realize they overcooked it, but they're like, oh, whatever, we're just going to give it to them and hope they don't notice. You cut into it and it's like overdone, which I personally cannot stand an overdone steak. So I'd be like, sorry, sending it back. I am that girl. I will do it because that's yuck. But then, then you think to yourself, even if it comes out within 2 minutes, right? Because they have another one on the grill. It doesn't matter. You had to send it back. And it just sours the entire experience because it wasn't right the minute it came to you. And it's the same thing in your other client interactions, really being upfront with expectations with them and them with you, but then trying your best to meet those expectations because they've been clear. And that's another reason you want to measure, right? Because if you don't know how long something's going to take, how can you give your client a realistic expectation of a completion deadline? Or if you don't know how much something's supposed to cost, how can you ever know what your profit margins are going to be? So there's a ton of stuff in your business you need to track for your own self to be profitable and successful, but also for your client so that they have the correct client experience that you're trying to curate.
Yeah. And I think, taking a step back to the overall theme of measuring and tracking certain metrics, it's important to know that you don't want to have too many, right?
Yeah, no.
You want to have maybe a small set of metrics that you track for each part of your business. And we talk about the big macros, okay, your sales process, your customer satisfaction, your client experience, like all of this stuff separately measured, maybe, 3 to 5 to 7 different metrics, depending on what that part of the process is. And then it's on you and your business to understand well enough, okay, let's start with the customer experience. That's a little bit tougher, right? Like, what are the things that the clients want? They want it to be done on time. They want it to be done on budget, and they want it to be done right. So then you can, some of these metrics are just a simple yes or no. How quickly were we able to get back to them when they called us for an estimate? How quickly were we able to get out to the estimate? How long were we given, did we give them as a time frame, and how quickly were we actually able to finish it? And then you can kind of track all these things separately. And that way, if your reviews have gone, from a 5-star down to a 4-star, you can start to say, okay, let's go back to those people who left us a 4-star and ask them what would have made it a 5-star. And then you can go back and once again, individually change one thing at a time. And if that thing doesn't fix it, change that thing back to the way it was before you try the second thing.
Yeah, right. Because you want to change it back, because you have to make sure that your variables are only having one at a time. And yeah, we need to make sure that in our key performance indicators and these metrics we're tracking, then we're not always looking backward. So many times when we're looking at processes, people have a tendency of automatically going to what's called a lagging indicator. So for instance, in a sales process, the actual sale is the lagging indicator, because it's the last thing that happens in that process. Now, it's not the last thing that happens in the entire process of the business in a macro sense, because the client paying you and then profitability is literally the lagging of lagging of lagging. And so many times that's all people look at. Well, how profitable was I? Well, it's like if you're just looking at your P&L profits, doesn't really tell you much anyways, but that's a topic for a whole nother podcast on what is and isn't on a P&L. The point being, profitability is literally the very last thing. So if all you're doing is looking at that, it's like you're driving your car in the rear view mirror and you're going to crash. Like, that's a problem. You can't drive your car only looking in the rear view. So we need to be looking out the windshield. And how we do that is by looking at leading indicators. So something like leads. Leads is a leading indicator in your sales process, even though it's a lagging indicator of your marketing process.
Right.
So when we stair step from our process to process in our business, what was a lagging becomes a leading of the next. So sales, your actual sign on the dotted line is the lagging indicator of your sales process, but is a leading indicator of your production process. So then it kind of goes down in a stair step, and you need to make sure you have these kind of toggled together so you know what's happening, so you can better project the future of your business.
Yeah, and I think that's important because leading and lagging are it's a concept that's not that familiar to most people, and you're going to, like she said, it's going to be a process where there's overlap between one step to the next, and the end of one process is the beginning of the next process. And so that's why we say it's important to track individual steps within each process. And then for that particular department or that particular crew or group that works on that particular part of your process, their metrics that they're tracking aren't too much. You don't want to give people too many things to track because, as we mentioned, they already are going to feel micromanaged. And if you're having them track too many things, it just becomes noise, So what do you want to track? You want to look at the important things. Is this, by tracking this, is it going to make a difference in how we sell? Is it going to make a difference in our productivity? Is it going to make a difference in our sales, our production, all of that stuff? Has to be important enough to measure, right? Not everything deserves being measured. So.
Oh yeah, I've seen some. I had a client once. They had the most ridiculous amount of key performance indicators. And I was like, you have so many, we'll just call them performance indicators. You don't even know if any of these are key. It's just so much. And they were like, we can't figure out what's wrong. I'm like, yeah, because you're tracking everything under the sun. You're tracking every, 2 seconds on what, I mean, it was asinine. There was like 300.
Yeah.
It was crazy pants. I'm like, the reason you guys are overwhelmed, like just looking at this sheet is overwhelming. Creating this sheet takes half the time of your senior level. You have this leadership team and their entire job is filling out this sheet so that you can be confused. Like, we need to strip it down. So yeah, sometimes I see people with too many or just none.
Yeah, you can't go too broad either. You go too broad and basically you're not tracking enough to know, like we said with the sales process. If you're only tracking one thing, it's too broad, and then you can't make any changes. You have one dial to turn, but that dial, underneath it all has like 5 different gears that help turn that dial, and you don't know which gear is broken that's causing that dial not to turn up the way you want it to.
Yeah, so it's definitely a delicate balance between too many and too few. And then you want to, pick out maybe one a quarter that's going to be something you're going to focus on for that quarter. It's going to be your critical number. So if you have a very specific focus, like for instance, I have a client right now that their critical number is consultations. They want a very specific amount of consultations. They aren't going to focus too much on how many leads. They're just going to focus on the consultations. So they're going to pump in as many leads as they need to get to that consultations, because we're trying to figure out kind of like how many leads they need for that and stuff like that. And then we're going to toggle from there. But that's their critical number. They've decided that is the thing that they're going to focus on. And it's like the one thing that will kind of rule them all, kind of like the one ring, but it's the one thing.
So yeah, when you're having these types of quarterly evaluations of your business, you want to set your goals for that quarter, and then you want to work backwards. I know you're big on this, and this is the great way to do it. What is our end goal? Okay, we want to hit X amount of consultations for this quarter, or and then you break it down. Okay, that's how many per month. That's how many per week. Okay, great. Now, if you've been tracking, if you've been tracking long enough, hey, we need to make X amount of phone calls to get this many consultations. Okay, and in order to get this many phone calls, we need this amount of leads. And so when you're tracking things, it helps you create a very clear path to the goal you're trying to reach, and it helps you see down along that path so you know where you're going from the start.
Yeah, and it also helps you to kind of like double check yourself. Like, is this even realistic? Because sometimes people will put stuff out there, and I'm like, yeah, but have you ever, like, you want to do this on a monthly or a daily basis, but have you ever actually done that even once? And you want to do it every single day for the next quarter? Like, if you've done it once, it's like, okay, but it's like, was that lightning in a bottle, or is it something recreatable? And okay, maybe it was recreatable. How did you do it the first time? Can we recreate that, day over day or month over month? There's a lot of questions that go into that. You need to delve deeper into, creating, I don't necessarily want to call it realistic goals, but attainable goals, in the sense that you don't want to always have a goal that's so out there that it just demoralizes your team because they can never hit it.
Right. And you have to be willing to pivot. I mean, you're going to have your quarterly goal, right? And that's the thing you're focused on. But if you notice that, during that quarter, say your focus is on client satisfaction, but as you get a month into the quarter, you realize that your sales have dipped tremendously. You still can focus on your client satisfaction on the one end, but also turn and start to figure out on those dials what's not working on the sales end, and get that fixed while you're also working on achieving a new goal.
Yeah.
And once again, it's like you said, having those dials. You have these 5 dials. Turn one at a time. That one doesn't fix it. Turn that one back. Turn the second one. You don't want to turn one. Okay, that didn't work. Now let's turn the second one, because who knows if that first dial actually might have fixed it, but it was going to take a little bit of time. And now you've turned the second one, and you thought that was the fix, and it really wasn't.
Yeah.
The only way you can do this is to just focus on one thing at a time, and it's going to be slower, but it's going to help you actually solve problems for the future.
Well, and you want to think about too, it's slower, but it's creating that foundation of success, right? The biggest skyscrapers in the world, how do they go so high? They first had to go so low. Like the Space Needle, for instance, in Seattle, its center of gravity is actually under the ground. It goes so deep into the ground that its center of gravity is literally in the ground. So just as much as you're trying to go high, you first have to go low. You first have to create that kind of framework of what you're tracking, figure out if it's the correct things to track, and then start from there. Because if you didn't create that foundation, you're just going to be kind of like, roaming around in the dark.
Absolutely. So the theme is you got to know what to track and you got to track it. And you got to meet that resistance with your team. You got to just explain. I mean, a lot of it's just about framing it and understanding. Say, hey, look, I'm not looking to micromanage you. No. We're trying to figure out the most efficient way to run this company so that you guys are all operating as well as you can. And, when you guys are getting overwhelmed, we know when the appropriate time is to bring on somebody else to help you out, and not bring them on too early, so that you're never lacking work and lacking hours, that we are tracking things in the right way to make your job as easy as possible for you to perform well.
Yeah. It's all about teamwork and just really being transparent and having communication with them, because honestly, tracking stuff can make their job easier and more enjoyable, but they first have to be able to see that vision. So I promise you it can be done. I have so many clients that were tracking nothing when we started, and now they track a lot.
And I think once you do it, you almost become kind of addicted to it. It becomes very like, oh, I want to see what this looks like now. I want to see how we improved. I want to see, you constantly want to know, because you get excited to see that improvement and that growth for your company. And then, if you don't see it, you're motivated to make those changes, to figure out what's wrong, to figure out how to get that thing back on track and back on target toward your goals again.
Yeah. And you can have, some gamification in there
Absolutely.
too. So, yeah.
I think that'll probably do it for this one.
Well, thanks so much for joining us on the Blue Collar Wealth Club, and we'll see you next time.